Thank you for joining me on today for the Dr. Eric K. Coleman Show. Please take a moment to subscribe, like, and click the notifications tab on this channel so you can stay abreast to all of the content pertaining to this platform. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Eric K. Coleman, Facebook at Dr. Eric Coleman, and you can contact me at Dr. Eric K. Coleman, all one word, at gmail.com to book one-on-one sessions, speaking engagements, and submit inquiries, questions, and episode content suggestions. With all that being said, let's get right into it. Today's discussion surrounds the subject of effective communication. We will be unpacking another TED Talk anchored by Celeste Headley in conjunction with excerpts from my book Paradigm, Chapter 6, Productive Communication. So let's jump right into it, and here we go, fam.
All right, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them?
I think we can all agree to that.
In order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady: stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either. So this world that we live in, this world in which every conversation has the potential to devolve into an argument, where our politicians can't speak to one another, and where even the most trivial of issues have someone fighting both passionately for it and against it, it's not normal. Pew Research did a study of 10,000 American adults, and they found that at this moment we are more polarized, we are more divided than we ever have been in history.
I want to stop there for a second, fam. Just like we mentioned in the last episode, I want to make sure that the content that we're bringing here is rooted in research. It is rooted in evidence-based material so that we can take this information and actually apply it to our lives in a specific way, as not to just be pulling things out of the clouds, but make sure that we understand that this is research that is actually being done in our society, just to show the significance and the need for having these conversations as to where we stand in today's culture and society pertaining to relationships and communication. So again, I just wanted to throw that in there.
We're less likely to compromise, which means we're not listening to each other. And we make decisions about where to live, who to marry, and even who our friends are going to be based on what we already believe. Again, that means we're not listening to each other. A conversation requires a balance between talking and listening, and somewhere along the way we lost that balance. Now, part of that is due to technology, the smartphones that you all either have in your hands or close enough that you could grab them really quickly. According to Pew Research, about a third of American teenagers send more than 100 texts a day. And many of them, almost most of them, are more likely to text their friends than they are to talk to them face to face. There's this great piece in The Atlantic. It was written by a high school teacher named Paul Barnwell. And he gave his kids a communication project. He wanted to teach them how to speak on a specific subject without using notes. And he said this: I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation? Now, I make my living talking to people. Nobel Prize winners, truck drivers, billionaires, kindergarten teachers, heads of state, plumbers. I talk to people that I like. I talk to people that I don't like. I talk to some people that I disagree with deeply on a personal level, but I still have a great conversation with them. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so teaching you how to talk and how to listen.
This point here that she's making concerning talking and listening. It doesn't matter if you like the person. It doesn't matter if you are in love with the person. there's a fundamental skill, there is a fundamental trait that I do agree with Ms. Headley here that we are losing in our society, and that is the skill set of effective listening and effective communication, knowing when to speak and knowing when to shut up. Hopefully, by the end of this program on today, we'll have some tangible walkaways that we can use in our daily lives, no matter what the relationship is, whether it's romantic, platonic, work, professional, acquaintance, parental, whatever it is, that we will take these tools that we're going to discuss on today, and we will be able to applicably use them in our day-to-day relationships.
Many of you have already heard a lot of advice on this. Things like look the person in the eye, think of interesting things, topics to discuss in advance, nod and smile to show that you're paying attention, repeat back what you just heard or summarize it. So I want you to forget all of that. It is crap. There is no reason to learn how to show you're paying attention if you
If
are in
you're paying
fact
attention.
paying attention.
Yeah, that's a very good point. There's no need to try to prove to someone that you're paying attention if you're actually paying attention.
Now, I actually use the exact same skills as a professional interviewer that I do in regular life. So I'm going to teach you how to interview people, and that's actually going to help you learn how to be better conversationalists. Learn to have a conversation without wasting your time, without getting bored, and please God, without offending anybody. We've all had really great conversations. We've had them before. We know what it's like. The kind of conversation where you walk away feeling engaged and inspired, or where you feel like you've made a real connection or you've been perfectly
Yeah.
understood. There is no reason why most of your interactions can't be like that. So I have 10 basic rules. I'm going to walk you through all of them. But honestly, if you just choose one of them and master it, you're already going to enjoy better conversations. Number one, don't multitask. And I don't mean just set down your cell phone or your tablet or your car keys or whatever's in your hand. I mean, be present. Be in that moment. Don't be thinking about your argument you had with your boss. Don't be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. If you want to get out of the conversation, get out of the conversation. But don't be half in it and half out of it. Number two, don't pontificate. If you wanted to state your opinion without any opportunity for response or argument or pushback or growth, write a blog. Now, there's a really good reason why I don't allow pundits on my show, because they're really boring. If they're a conservative, they're going to hate Obama and food stamps and abortion. If they're a liberal, they're going to hate big banks and oil corporations and Dick Cheney. Totally predictable. And you don't want to be like that. You need to enter every conversation assuming that you have something to learn.
Let me stop her there. Let's unpack this a little bit. There were two um, pointed suggestions that were just shared with us. Number one is don't multitask or be present in the moment. And I know for myself, I've had issue with that. I have grown in that area, and quite frankly, I am still growing in that area of making sure that I am not multitasking in the moment, that I am present. That's something that my wife, she reminds me a lot of, and I'm glad because I need those reminders pertaining to Eric. Turn your brain off, just be present in the moment. Don't worry about what you have to do later on. Don't worry about what's coming down the pipeline. Just be present in the moment. Going past the communication piece in a conversation, but just being present in the moment when you are at an event, when you're spending time with your spouse, when you're spending time with your children, when there's an important conversation that needs to be had, be in the moment. And I know I'm not the only person who uh, is thinking about what will be my response, what will be my rebuttal, what will be my suggestion. Because at the heart of things, I'm a fixer. I like to create solutions, best practices. I like to make things work, to have a walkaway to where we can debate this thing. But a lot of times I have learned, even in conversations with my wife, that sometimes I just need to shut up and listen. If she wants my feedback, if she wants my suggestions, she'll ask for them. That's one piece of advice that I would share with everyone is just sometimes we just need to shut up and just be in the moment, just be present. And when she was talking about when you're entering into conversations and you just want to state your claim and you don't want any pushback, she said, write a blog because no one else can rebuttal your blog because it's a one sided conversation. But if we are really intending to enter into conversation with someone, we should be willing, ready, and able to have that back and forth dialogue. And just as she stated in here, Miss Headley, is that every conversation we should be expecting and anticipating a teaching moment. Let's continue.
The famed therapist Ed Scott Peck said that true listening requires a setting aside of oneself.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that means setting aside your personal opinion.
Absolutely.
He said that sensing this acceptance, the speaker will become less and less vulnerable and more likely to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener. Again, assume that you have something to learn. Bill Nye, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. I put it this way: everybody is an expert in something. Number 3, use open-ended questions. In this case, take a cue from journalists. Start your questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. If you put in a complicated question, you're going to get a simple answer out. If I ask you, were you terrified? You're going to respond to the most powerful word in that sentence, which is terrified. And the answer is, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Were you angry? Yes, I was very angry. Let them describe it. They're the ones that know. Try asking them things like, what was that like? How did that feel? Because then they might have to stop for a moment and think about it.
That's a very good point. Another teaching moment, just from my personal experiences. My wife, she's a elementary school principal, and she taught me something very critical. At one point I was having trouble communicating with my boys. I have an 18-year-old and a 13-year-old. And a number of years ago, when they come home from school, I would ask, so how was your day? And I'm pretty sure a lot of you can relate to this. And the response was good. And so that would frustrate me because I really want to know about your day, but all I'm getting are one word responses. And so my wife gave me a wonderful tip. She said, Eric, you're not asking the right question. And they're just responding to what you asked. You are asking a closed question. How was your day? Obviously, they're just going to say good. And so I learned from that. From that point on, I started asking open ended questions. Well, hello, son. Tell me something interesting that happened in your day today. So, again, to her point, it's causing them to stop and think. So, no matter what relationship we are engaging in, whether it's professional, if you're interviewing, if you're talking with your boss or you're talking to subordinates, if you're talking to a spouse, if you're talking to your boyfriend or girlfriend, have those open ended questions. Well, dear, when I did this, how did that make you feel? As opposed to, are you mad? We're setting ourselves up for failure when we're asking those kinds of questions because we're not going to get the response that we're looking for. So, in that regard, we want to make sure that we are asking the right questions to get the right response so that we can get the right results. Let's continue.
And you're going to get a much more interesting response. Number 4, go with the flow. That means thoughts will come into your mind and you need to let them go out of your mind. We've heard interviews often in which a guest is talking for several minutes and then the host comes back in and asks a question which seems like it comes out of nowhere or it's already been answered. That means the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he thought of this really clever question and he was just bound and determined to say that. And we do the exact same thing. We're
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then we remember that time that we met Hugh Jackman in a coffee shop and we stop listening. We're just waiting for a moment to interject our story about Hugh Jackman and coffee. Stories and ideas are going to come to you. You need to let them come and let them go. Number 5, if you don't know, say that you don't know. Now, people on the radio, especially on NPR, are much more aware that they're going on the record. And so they're more careful about what they claim to be an expert in and what they claim to know for sure. Do that. Err on the side of caution. Talk should not be cheap. Number 6, don't equate your experience with theirs. If they're talking about having lost a family member, don't start talking about the time that you lost a family member.
I definitely need to stop and pause there. Equating experiences with experiences. I actually discussed this in the book. How dare you make my experience, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, my situation all about you? And I'm pretty sure we have been there and done that to where we have engaged in a conversation with someone, and next thing we know, when we're being vulnerable, we're sharing our heart, we're opening up, and then next thing we know, the conversation totally goes left, and now the conversation is totally about the other person, their thoughts, their perspectives, their feelings, their emotions, and at that point, just by a natural reaction, we tend to shut down. I'm no longer going to be vulnerable with this person because what's the point? They're not even really engaged in the conversation enough to listen as to hear what I have to say and where I'm coming from. And this next part, I'm not going to say it for a justification of the other person or party that's engaging in the conversation. Maybe that's their only way that they know how to engage in the conversation is to relate the conversation to themselves, talk about themselves, talk about their lived experiences. And in their mind, they're probably thinking, well, if I share my experience and share how I felt, then this is going to help the other person. But we got to be very careful with that because, again, it can shut the other person down. It can come off as being insensitive. It can come off as the person really does not care how I feel and they want to have the spotlight on them. It could come off as being narcissistic. It could come off as being self centered, a plethora of things. So we really want to be careful. If the person wants to know your story or give me an example or a time when, when we're sitting in these interviews and they say, well, tell me about a time to where there was a policy or procedure that needed to be implemented. What was your role in it? How did you go about it? What was the reaction? What was the end result? And what did you learn from it? So when we talk about those open-ended questions, then that is our opportune time to jump in and give our lived experiences. But if it is not solicited, we need to just shut up and listen and allow the other person to express themselves. Let's continue.
Talking about the trouble that they're having at work, don't tell them about how much you hate your job. It's not the same. It is never the same. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, it is not about you.
Absolutely. It is not about you.
How amazing you are or how much you've suffered.
Yes.
Somebody asked Stephen Hawking once what his IQ was, and he says, I have no idea. People who brag about their IQs are losers. Conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Number 7.
How are you today? Read my blog. You can't even stop to have a conversation.
Especially in work conversations or in conversations with our kids, we have a point to make, so we just keep rephrasing it over and over. Don't do that. Number 8, stay out of the weeds. Frankly, people don't care about the years, the names, the dates, all those details that you're struggling to come up with in your mind. They don't care. What they care about is you. They care about what you're like, what you have in common. So forget the details. Leave them out. Number 9, this is not the last one, but it is the most important one. Listen. I cannot tell you how many really important people have said that listening is perhaps the number one most important skill that you can develop. Buddha said, and I'm paraphrasing, if your mouth is open, you're not learning. And Calvin Coolidge said, no man ever listened his way out of a job. Why do we not listen to each other? Number 1, we'd rather talk.
Why don't we listen to one another? Why don't we listen? And this goes back to our previous episode when we were talking about romantic competence, insight, mutuality, and emotion regulation. We need to be able to listen to one another. Once we have insight on ourselves, once we have insight on the other person, whatever the conversation may be, then we can engage mutually to figure out how we can move forward with whatever the basis of this conversation is. But we have to start with listening to the other person's thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, their hurts, their gripes, their pains. No matter how uncomfortable the conversation may be, we need, again, to be present in the moment. We need to set all other things aside and give our undivided attention. As stated earlier in the clip, if you don't want to be a part of the conversation, get out of the conversation, but don't be halfway in it. So she's making a wonderful point here that we need to be present in the conversations. We need to listen. Listening is the most important thing, because if we're constantly talking, we're not listening, we're not engaging, we're not taking in what the person is saying. Let's continue.
When I'm talking, I'm in control. I don't have to hear anything I'm not interested in. I'm the center of attention. I can bolster my own identity. But there's another, we get distracted. The average person talks at about 225 words per minute, but can listen at up to 500 words per minute. So our minds are filling in those other 275 words. And look, I know it takes effort and energy to actually pay attention to someone. But if you can't do that, you're not in a conversation. You're just two people shouting out barely related sentences in the same place. You have to listen to one another. Stephen Covey said it very beautifully. He said, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply.
Absolutely. And this goes back to a conversation that we were having about arguments. Do we ever wonder why, when people are arguing, when we are engaging in unhealthy dialogue in relationships, and when one person is shouting and screaming at the other, do we really hear what's going on? Or is the other person trying to shout louder than the other person just to get their point across and to be heard? And that's the whole point of when you're shouting, you want to be heard because you feel as if the other person is not listening. So if I escalate my voice, then that means you have to hear me because I'm saying it louder. In society today, it has been normalized that this is how relationships are supposed to be, which is so far from the truth. We're not listening to one another. We need to stop. We need to listen. We need to take into account what good is shouting going to do? What kind of example are we setting in our homes for our children to see? If we're just constantly shouting at one another, No one's listening and no one is grasping anything.
One more rule, and number 10, and it's this one: be brief.
Yes.
All of this boils down to the same basic concept, and it is this one: be interested in other people. You know, I grew up with a very famous grandfather, and there was kind of a ritual in my home. People would come over to talk to my grandparents, and after they would leave, my mother would come over to us and she'd say, "Do you know who that was? She was the runner-up to Miss America. He was the mayor of Sacramento. She won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a Russian ballet dancer." And I kind of grew up assuming everyone has some hidden amazing thing about them. And I think it's what makes me a better host. I keep my mouth shut as often as I possibly can. I keep my mind open, and I'm always prepared to be amazed, and I'm never disappointed. You do the same thing. Go out, talk to people, listen to people, and most importantly, be prepared to be amazed. Thanks.
If anything we did not learn on today, I want us to make sure that we shut up and listen and that we be present in the moment. There are so many things that we are able to learn when we are just willing to just listen to people. We got to take inventory of what's in that bag, what's in that backpack, so we can understand then of how we show up to relationships. And when we show up to the relationship, we then understand how we engage in the relationship. And if we start listening more and keeping our mouths shut more, we can affect change, this paradigm, this thinking different about relationships, to where we will be able to affect our households, our families, which in turn will be a ripple effect of affecting our communities, our society, our nation on a global level and internationally. And so until we meet again, fam, be blessed and start to think differently about relationships.